A very warm welcome to everyone of you who have gathered here this evening. Our topic for today is why youth should take to spiritual life, to Krishna consciousness at this age. Of course, the answer is very simple. Let me begin by asking you a question. What's the right age to go to school? 55 or 5? You can always learn at 55. You can get admitted to school and you can go to university if you like. Even get a high school diploma if you like at 55, at 60. But that's good because in a sense we're always students, we're always learning. But generally, what's the right time to start? 5. Why? Why do we need to start at this age? Because that's the age to learn. That's when the body, the mind, the intelligence are just ripe. They're just ready for learning, for absorbing things. Do you know that the human child, or the brain of the human child, has the capacity to learn as many as 30 languages? But as you grow older, it becomes harder and harder to learn. Then your memory isn't as good as it used to be when you get older, and you're not as sharp, your enthusiasm lacks. You have your mind is weighed down with so many other problems, engagements. You're thinking about many of the bigger issues of life, the struggles that we all encounter in life, and we're not able to focus. But childhood, youth, adolescence and youth, these are the times when the mind is really fresh. So when people make a distinction between ordinary learning and spiritual learning, that distinction is essential, as we heard in the introduction, that while material learning is important, but not as important as spiritual learning. At the same time, there is also a uniformity. What is that? The principle of learning is the same, whether it's material subjects or whether it's spiritual subjects. You start early, you become an expert earlier. So, if material learning can start when you're 5 or 6, when you go to the first grade of school, then why not spiritual knowledge? Indeed, spiritual knowledge must also start at that stage. Why do we always make a distinction? Why do we have separate standard for spiritual knowledge? If material knowledge should be gained early, so should spiritual knowledge. Think of an Olympic champion who wants to be a sportsman. So if you want to be an Olympic champion, when do you start practicing? When you're 55? When you're 60? No, you start when you're really young. And there are some countries in which they start training you by the time you're 6 or 7. Like gymnastics, for example. You become old when you're like 14 or 15. 17, 18, you're like the grand old lady or the grand old man of gymnastics. Look at any of the sports, an athlete. An athlete is considered old by the time he or she is 30. So you start very young. So spiritual knowledge also is an endeavor that must begin very, very early. And when we do that, we have all our life. But you don't get old like you do in athletics or in some sports. But you become wiser. The earlier you start, the longer you have to learn more, to apply it in your life, to assimilate it, and then to actually develop it and become perfect. the shorter the time you have available, the lesser the likelihood of you attaining success and perfection in that field. So when you're older, you have lesser time in your life at your disposal. If you're 55 or 60 when you start, then you have not that much time available. So when you start at 5, then let's say an average age of 75, then you have 70 years left. But if you start at 60, you have only 15 years. And you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You've heard this proverb? Very hard to change your ways, to change your thoughts, to change your beliefs, to change your attitudes, to change your lifestyle, your practices when you're old. It's not impossible. Many people do it. But it's much easier when you start early. Your mind, your consciousness is very pliable when you're younger. Just like plasticine or clay, you can mold it any way you like, for the good or for the bad. So when you engage the child's mind or the youth's mind in spiritual matters, then the mind or the consciousness is being molded for the good. And then the child can develop into a youth, an adolescent, and then a youth, and then an adult, young adult. And all through life, this person will be engaged in the art of perfecting spiritual life. So really, the idea of developing or starting spirituality, or as we call it, Krishna Consciousness, earlier rather than later, is something very simple to understand. There is also the wrong conception, the misconception that youth is meant for enjoyment, and therefore once we are done with enjoyment and we say been there, done that, then we can go to spiritual life, because by then we would have exhausted ourselves of all our material desires and all our material ambitions. Now in old age we can take to spiritual life. Yes, we become exhausted physically, but our desires don't get exhausted. They remain very strong. At every stage of life, there is a kind of preoccupation that age group has. There's a nice proverb or a verse in the Sanskrit language, which I'll just cite and then I'll explain it. Balastavat kridasaktaha, tarunastavat tarunisaktaha, vriddhastavat chintasaktaha, varopi brahmani kopi nasaktaha. When one is a child, in childhood, one is attached to playing. Children are very playful by nature. When one becomes a youth, the boys are attracted to the girls to the boys, and youth passes like that. Childhood passes in playing, youth passes in this kind of activity. In old age, one is attached to worrying. So one worries and worries and worries. That's the nature of old age. You tend to worry about everything. So where is the time for taking to spiritual life? That's the question. Because in every age, you have this preoccupation. So who can take shelter of spiritual life? That's the question. So the answer is that you must begin early. And if you begin early, then you have so many years ahead of you. You make mistakes, you learn. You can learn from many other people. When you're younger, you don't mind learning from everybody. When you get older, you get more ego. And you think, I know. And you're not so amenable to learning from others. But when you're younger, it's very easy to learn. And you follow the words of the teacher very easily. So therefore, in every way, it's easier to start spiritual life in childhood. Let me ask you another question. Let's say you're going to meet a friend on that person's birthday or a wedding or something like that, and you want to present that person with a rose or a bouquet of flowers, and you give that person flowers that are stale, that are probably 6 months old, that have dried up, the petals are falling off. What do you think that person is going to think when you give him or her this bouquet of flowers? The person is going to actually be offended. Never mind, you don't give a bouquet, give one flower, but that one flower should be fresh. Yes, the petals should be there. So similarly, spiritual life means to understand who we are, who God is, and what our relationship with God is, and what our relationship with this world is. So in our process of understanding God, we say, my dear God, in childhood and youth, I'm going to enjoy. And when my body is no longer fit for enjoyment, even though my mind desires it, then I'll come to you. In other words, when my body is not good for anything else, it's not fit at all, then I come to say, I can serve you. But then, what's the use of this body at that time? The older we are, the more incapable the body becomes of doing so many things. So better to start early and cultivate this. Once in a train, the travel attendant, the officer found a wallet that had dropped down. So he picked up the wallet and he opened it to see who it belonged to, but there was no business card or there was no name, but there was just one picture of Krishna, the all-attractive Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he looked around, there was a crowd of people sitting there, and he said, who does this belong to? Someone has dropped it. So one very old gentleman, he raised his hand and said, yes, that's mine. So the officer asked him, so what's the proof that it's yours? He just wanted to make sure he wasn't making a mistake. So what's the proof that this is yours? He said, there's a picture of Krishna inside. He said, well, anyone could have a picture of Krishna in his or her wallet. So how does that prove that it's yours? So he said, let me tell you my life story. And that's not a very likely scenario. The ticket office doesn't have time to sit and hear everybody's life stories. But anyway, this story is instructive. So he said, when I was very young, then I had a little wallet. I used to get some pocket money. And in my wallet were the pictures of my parents. And then I grew to teenage. And then I started admiring my own self because I was always conscious about how I looked. I would like to look into the mirror frequently and dress nicely so I would appear very attractive. And I had my own photo instead of my parents because at that stage I liked to look at myself. Then as time went on, then I got married. And then I had the picture of my wife in the wallet. And the time went on, and then I had a child. Then I had the picture of my child in the wallet. And then the time went on, and my children grew up into nice young teenagers. And then I had their children, their photographs with me. And time has passed. And now my parents are no more. They left many, many years ago. My wife passed away some years ago. My children are grown up, but they have no time for me. And I've realized that of all these pictures, this picture of Krishna is the most useful one for me because it's keeping me from getting lonely and understanding what the purpose of my life is. Had I kept this picture with me in my wallet from my childhood, then today I wouldn't be feeling lonely. So had I started early and realized that this is my real companion, that this is my real solace and my real purpose in life, then I wouldn't have been so lost and lonely in my old age. Meaning that all through life, we get attached to so many things, to so many situations, and we forget the ultimate goal of our life. And by the time we realize it, it's very late. It's too late. Of course, better late than never. So even though it's late, it's good to take it up. But nevertheless, it's such a waste of valuable human life. In answering the question of whether it is better to take to spiritual life from a young age or an old age, the most important question to ask is, what is the purpose of human life? If the purpose of human life is something material, if the purpose of human life is enjoyment and so on and so forth, then it's fine. Then you don't need to take to spiritual life anytime. But that's not the case. The goal of human life is to become self-realized, is to become spiritually perfect. And therefore, might as well start early. Why waste time? Let's say you're sitting in front of a beautiful meal and you're hungry. Why wait? Start. When you realize the purpose of life is spiritual, then we should take to it immediately. Postponing it has no meaning, no purpose. And we say that we will postpone it to another day, but we don't know whether we're going to live that long, to be old. The statistics of those who die before the age of 30 or 40 are quite astonishing. I think at least about 8 to 10% of the population dies before the age of 40. So before 40, we still consider ourselves very youthful. So 10% of the population, that's a huge number. So what's the guarantee that we're going to live till old age in order to start spiritual life? That's an important question. So therefore, and I personally know of so many young people who have left this world, who died, either due to some accident or due to some illness. And we're not even talking about those who are killed in the womb. That's a whole Pandora's box. That's another can of worms, which we won't open up now. So the point is that you postpone something for your old age and you're not even sure whether you're going to live up to your old age. So better to start early. And to think that when I'm old, I'll automatically give up my desires of this world, my ambitions, and I'll focus on serving God or cultivating spiritual knowledge. It doesn't happen like that. There's another Sanskrit verse that I'd like to quote, and I'll explain it as well. A very nice verse. It says, Angam galitam palitam mundam dashana vihinam jatam tundam vriddho yati grihitva dandam tadapi namunchatyasha pindam. Angam galitam. It says, pointing out to a particular person, this person's body has worn out. He's describing an old man, right? He says, here is a person, his body has worn out. Angam galitam palitam mundam. His hair has become grey and white. Dashana vihinam jatam tunnam. All the teeth have fallen out from his mouth. He doesn't have any teeth left anymore. Vriddho yati. There goes the old man. Grihitva dandam, holding a stick and walking along. Tadapi na munchatya asha pindam. Still, his mind does not cease to be a bundle of desires, material desires. So it doesn't mean that because one has become old, by default, automatically you're going to become old. So it's not that by default you're going to lose all your desires because you became old. It doesn't work like that. Your mind is still going to have all the petty and big desires of this world, all the ambitions of this world. It's only that you're probably so beaten down that you've lost the enthusiasm for it, or that you're incapable of it either because of some physical limitation or something else. But the point is that simply delaying it is not going to work. Because even at the end, the mind is so tricky, it will still keep us in the material realm. It will still keep us absorbed. And therefore, when people get retired, if they haven't taken to spiritual life seriously when they were younger, how will they spend their time? It's a hard struggle. It's a trauma. Elderly people don't know how to spend their time. So they'll either sit in front of the television, or maybe go fishing, or do something of the sort, go into the park and sit with other people of their age and chat. And one of the most sorry scenes that we see are in old age homes, where they sit together, they're lonely, but they have all the time at their disposal. They have no job to go to. They don't have to worry about their food. They get everything, but they're hardly interested in spiritual life. Why? Because they haven't cultivated that from the beginning. And for one who has cultivated that from the beginning, in old age, spiritual life comes very naturally. It's very easy to perform spiritual life because you've been doing that all your life. Practice makes perfect. You've heard that proverb. When you learn typing on a keyboard, initially you start with one finger, and then you move to 2 or 3, and you make a lot of mistakes. And then you learn the proper techniques of typing. You get trained up, and then you do a lot of practice. And as you get training and as you practice, then you become better, you become more accurate, and you become quicker in your typing. And a time comes when, even without looking down at the keyboard, your fingers just fly on the keyboard, and there's no mistake. Your typing is accurate. Can any of you type like that? Without looking? How many of you can type without looking? Okay. As far as I'm concerned, you got mystic power. I'm certainly not one of those. I'm more of those one-finger types. The old models. So, how did you attain that perfection? Because of practice. You also trained yourself up because you knew where to keep the finger and how to move it and so on. But you practiced a lot. And therefore, it comes so naturally, you don't even have to look at the keyboard. And you don't make a mistake. So it is with spiritual knowledge, with spiritual practices, with spiritual inclinations. If you do it all through your life in the beginning, then by the time you're old, everything has come so naturally to you. You become naturally self-realized. You don't even have to make excessive effort because now it's easy for you. You've been doing that all your life. But when you start late, it's so much harder. So really speaking, there is no question of denying the usefulness of starting early. Anything, catch 'em young, they say. There was a great devotee of Lord Krishna whose name appears in the great Śrīmad Bhāgavatam scripture. And he has said in a famous verse that actually one should practice spiritual life from the age of 5. Many times people who are young, they're accosted by other people who are either young or maybe much older, and they say, you know, this is not the age you should be doing spiritual life in. You should be enjoying, you should be going here, you should be doing this and that. You shouldn't, this is not the age to start it. And so when young people who are trying to become Krishna conscious, they ask me this question, and they say that people are kind of confronting them and saying, yours is not the age to start Krishna consciousness. I say, yeah, they're right. You should have started 15 years earlier. Now you're 20, you should have started when you were 5 years old. So yes, this is not the age to start. You should have started at the age of 5, but better late than never, start at 20. Actually, you know when you should start? Not even at 5. The task should be started by your parents. When? Before you were even conceived. What to speak of before you were born? That is what the Vedic scriptures teach us. Even before you were conceived, the preparation for the conception of the child is a very deep subject. And the parents have to contemplate on what kind of child they want. What kind of qualities should that child be endowed with? And spiritually minded parents will pray, please give us, please let a soul who's very noble, with great character, and who's very spiritually inclined become our child. So that's when some soul who has left his or her spiritual life incomplete from the previous life then gets an opportunity to get born in a family of spiritualists. And then when that soul then enters into the womb of the mother, then there's another phase of education that goes on. In the womb of the mother, the child is enormously receptive. The child hears many things. The child learns many things. In the Vedic scriptures, there are numerous examples of how children learned things in the mother's womb and never forgot. The mothers forgot it. But the children didn't, because their receptivity was so sharp. Prahlad himself, whom I just cited, when he was in his mother's womb, the great saint Narada came and he spoke the great scripture, the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Narada knew that within the womb of this lady was a great devotee. And he would do extraordinarily wonderful things for the world in devotion to Krishna. So he spoke the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Perhaps his mother, who was hearing, she may have wandered off in her attention, her mind may have wandered here and there, as it usually happens when grown-ups sit. When we sit in a lecture, our mind wanders. And I'm sure every single one of us has experienced that sitting in this room today. From the time the lecture has started, your mind has most certainly wandered to some place or the other. Don't say no, because it is true. It has. It must. Psychologists say that human beings have about 80,000 thoughts, different thoughts every day. And if you were to work out the arithmetic, assuming you sleep for 6 hours, it works out an average to 1 thought a second, or 1.5 seconds. So every 1.5 seconds you've got some new thought going on. You're thinking of something else. That's how the mind is. So when we are grown up, and if we've not trained our mind to hear and to receive spiritual knowledge and to concentrate, then when we grow up, we won't be able to do it. So this child's mother was hearing, she was faithful, etc. But later on, many years later, she didn't remember it when the child was 5 years old. But this boy who became known as Prahlad, he was teaching his classmates when he was 5 years old. And the classmates asked him, the Prahlad, how come you are teaching us all these things? Where have you learned them from? And he said, I learned them from my guru. They protested and said, but your guru and our guru is the same. But our guru has never taught us these things. Then Prahlad explained that I had another guru. When I was in my mother's womb, I heard this, the whole Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, and I remember it, I understand it, and therefore I am now able to speak this to you. In the Mahabharata also there is a story, the episode of how the great warrior Arjuna had a son in his wife Subhadra. When the son was in the womb, Arjuna was explaining a certain military technique of how to get inside a certain military formation, which was called the Chakra Vyuha, like a circle. Because in military strategy in the ancient days, they would fight in front of each other, unlike today where war is very asymmetrical and war is basically crazy. But in those days, the armies would face each other. There was a lot of ethics in warfare. So they would face each other and then attack each other. They would assemble at a certain place and then they would fight to the finish. So they would have formations which would be very difficult for the enemy to penetrate. And then, because of that impenetrable defense, they were able to defeat the enemy. So one such formation was called a Chakravyuha, which was like a spiral, a round thing. Very difficult to penetrate, but Arjuna, being a great warrior, knew how to penetrate that. So he was teaching that, and then his wife, as she was hearing, she fell asleep. As she was hearing. She wasn't much into military warfare and everything. The child was hearing it. Later on, his name became Abhimanyu. And he was only 16 years old when that famous battle of Kurukshetra was fought. The greatest battle in all of history, of human history. And he fought very valiantly. And the same Chakravyuha formation had been formed by the enemy. And he had heard about how to enter into the Chakravyuha from his father when Abhimanyu was in his mother's womb. But he had not heard the other half of how to get out of it. So he entered most valiantly, but he didn't have that knowledge to exit, and therefore he was killed within the womb, within that Chakravyuha. So another example of how people can learn within the womb. And this is a science now, that people are learning about it. We get vibrations, we get things. A child can learn exceptionally well even within the womb. So then, what to speak of starting spiritual life in youth? We should start spiritual life from the time one is in one's mother's womb. And it is a responsibility of the parents to see that their children started even before they conceive the child. Now that's the kind of scale we are talking about. So how funny it is when people say that we shouldn't, it's too early to start in youth. That is not how a spiritual culture thinks. In a spiritual culture, value is given to spiritual life, to spiritual accomplishment. A person is considered successful and perfect if he or she has perfected spiritual life. In a society that is materialistic, emphasis is given on material achievements, and success and perfection is gauged in terms of how much you've earned, or what material accolades you've earned, what medals you've earned, how famous you've become, etc. But that is not the standard of success in a spiritually cultured civilization. So where the priority of the society and civilization is spiritual perfection, in such a society, knowledge of spiritual matters will be given to children from a very young age. Even through the school, the educational system must be like that. There is that little story I cite often about one little school in the olden days, where the teacher said to the children, "I am giving you one fruit each. I want you to go and eat this fruit in a place where nobody will watch you." So all the children disappear and they all come back very quickly. The one comes back, he said, "Where did you eat this fruit?" "I went behind a tree, no one could see me." The other one said, "I went behind a bush, I hid within a bush and no one could see me." Another one said, "I went into a cave and no one could see me." And this went on. However, there was one child, one boy who didn't come back. And then even when he came all the way in the evening, he still had that fruit. And the teacher asked him, so why haven't you eaten that fruit? Didn't you find any place where nobody would see you? So he said, no. He said, why? The other boys started making fun of him. Then he started explaining why. He said, even though I may not be visible to my friends and to other humans, but God is always seeing me. Everywhere, wherever I am, God is there. He's seeing every action of mine. The moon, the sun, the stars, the directions, the air, everything, the birds, the insects, they're all seeing me. And the teacher was so pleased. He said, of all the students, you're the only one who's actually understood what I wanted to teach. So this was the training and education that was given so that the spiritual inclinations of children would be encouraged right from a young age. So they didn't even wait till youth or adolescence to start. The other day in India, one parent was complaining that they had a guest speaker in the school of their child who was in 8th year of school. And the guest speaker had a topic, and the topic was God does not exist. That was the topic. So this parent was very disturbed and upset. And they went and complained to the principal. And the principal said that the children must be exposed to all points of view. But then the parent complained, but when we come for spiritual lectures, you don't encourage that. So why don't you encourage them to also hear the spiritual point of view? Why only an atheistic point of view? So the modern educational system also has become, as Srila Prabhupada, Founder-Acharya said, a spiritual slaughterhouse, where the spiritual instincts of children are destroyed. Where by the time they emerge from the educational system through school and college, they become thoroughly skeptical and agnostic at the very least, if not atheistic. So therefore, the whole society is in the state it is in now, because we have somehow or the other considered that spiritual knowledge is not important for us. It's not scientific, it is not logical or rational, but that's not the case. So any society that seeks its welfare and any individual that seeks his or her welfare must start early. Then there will be perfection. Imagine a society in which everybody starts early, learning spiritual life, but in a very wonderful way, not in a way which oppresses the creativity of the individual, not in a way that suppresses the spirit of inquiry of the individual. Real spiritual life facilitates inquiry. But that spirit of inquiry must be directed and channelized in a proper way. And then when one reaches the teenage, which is an age of turbulence, and the hormones start acting up, and one becomes aware of the temptations of the world, and then one enters into youth because one's body and senses are very strong and demanding, one will not succumb. One will rather remain staunch in spiritual convictions, and by the time one reaches old age, one would have become like a rock in terms of spiritual conviction. One would have been very close to perfection. So that is why any society must encourage young people to take to spiritual life. This will be the one panacea for all the problems of the world. Then the world can become the spiritual world. So I'm really very glad that this program has been arranged and that all of you are here this evening. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for having this program organized. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask or speak, and we can have a little discussion for a few minutes. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Okay, so your question is, for a young adult, how does one go about balancing or managing both demands? One is spiritual life and the other is the material life. How does one balance it? Actually, it's an unfair competition because the material side is so heavily loaded because the whole world is like that. So your material life gets excessive emphasis and focus because that's what the world tells us. So the whole world moves in that direction. So naturally that scales tilt heavily in favor of material life because we get influenced by that. Because that's what we see, that's what we experience all the time in the outside world. And it tells in our consciousness. The consciousness of the world rubs off on us. The practices, lifestyles, the culture of the world rubs off heavily on us because of the extent to which we have to be exposed to that culture and that way of life. So the only way to make it fair is to increase the association that is spiritual. So when, and not just for young people, but for anybody and everybody, it is very important that we should keep company as often as we can, as much as we can, of people who are very serious spiritual aspirants. And for young adults, it's also very helpful to have the company of other young adults who are similarly spiritually inclined. That will be a source of great strength. Even then, it's not easy, but it's going to make it possible. So that is the one thing I would say that's most important. Otherwise, there are many other things too, but this is the most important thing. If we constantly, as much as possible, associate with those who have this spiritual inclination, who want to seriously live their life according to spiritual standards, then we stand a much better chance of making it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make it. So young spiritualists of the world, unite.
Should I repeat it?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so you mentioned how we should all sort of unify and grow together in our spiritual consciousness and help each other. But what about for those people who it's not available to them or they've not come across this path? How do they get sort of the benefits of that or come into this path?
That's why you have to reach out.
Okay.
You reach out to them. Your friends at the university, at your workplace, living around you, reach out to them and share it with them. And those who are interested will take it up. If there's anything that the world lacks, it's the number of people with spiritual consciousness. It's not the lack of jobs or lack of this or that. That's the real problem of the world. The real problem of the world is lack of spiritually qualified people. So, considering that, we have to do what's required. So we should go and talk to people and introduce them to spiritual life if they're willing to listen, if they're willing to participate. There are many people who are waiting for someone like you to come up to them and say, "Are you interested in this? Please, we have a program, why don't you come?" Many will say no, but there will be some, those few, rare few, who will say, "Yes, I'm interested." So we have to make good that lack by reaching out and sharing the valuable wisdom that we have learned and giving them an opportunity to learn it also. Okay?
The affliction of our age, the young people, is well defined in one word. Famously it's called the FOMO effect. F-O-M-O, fear of missing out. That the realization, the anxiety that we can't have it all. That one set of choices will define our life and we'll miss out on everything else in life. So how do we approach spiritual life, when in our environment or in our education system, we have many multiple goals, and one set of choices, like I said, would essentially rule out many other things. We would like to do a lot of other things and be active spiritual practitioners as well. So how do we deal with this anxiety of not being able to have everything and dealing with just, one part? Thank you.
Okay, so is that part of the jargon nowadays? FOMO?
FOMO. It's called FOMO.
FOMO, fear of missing out.
There is YOLO and there is FOMO.
What is YOMO?
YOLO means you only live once. And because of YOLO, there is FOMO. Fear of missing out.
So you only live once, YOLO. YOLO and FOMO. So when the foundational principle is false, then the conclusion will also be false. You don't only live once. That's the problem. They don't understand their spiritual nature. So they make all these smart acronyms and abbreviations, but they're false. You don't only live once. So we should make our own acronyms. Nice ones to tell, to counteract the ones that they're making. And as far as FOMO is concerned, fear of missing out. You're afraid of missing out on what? On something that is valuable, that you consider valuable. And what you consider valuable happens according to what the level of your knowledge and understanding of things. If you're not aware of certain things, then you don't consider them valuable. Let's say if there's someone who likes cars, and the person wants the best cars, Jaguar, whatever it is, right? The Porsche or Lamborghini or whatever it is. But if I don't know of the existence of these cars, then I don't have the fear of missing out on that, yes? So, but when I know I like cars and these cars exist, then there's a fear of missing out. In other words, with the more you understand something is valuable, you understand what it is that is valuable, then you should fear missing out on that. So someone who has the option of getting a Lamborghini or getting a little old Vauxhall or something, not that I have anything against Vauxhalls, then where is the comparison? So people talk of FOMO, fear of missing out on material enjoyment, because they haven't seen the Lamborghini of spiritual enjoyment. Once they see that, then they should be worried about missing out on that. Fear of missing out on spiritual bliss. So we should direct the FOMO towards spiritual bliss. Look, what you stand to lose is this. And when you have the Lamborghini, you don't mind if you don't have that old beat-up Vauxhall. So it's making people aware of a higher taste, a higher reality. Then automatically they'll know that they don't want to miss out on that. Okay? Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.